It started as a delightful morning for me, if being woken up at 3 a.m. because of a pressure break in the southwest pipe channel was pleasant. I briskly walked with the night guard on duty in this section, Miss Warnick. She had her flashlight, and I had my battery-powered lantern with a backpack of tools ready for any fixing. The glossy tiled floor made the squeak of her slippers all the more unsettling. My backpack created an annoying clank as it bounced with each heavy step I took. I hope this didn't draw the attention of Warnick to my unsightly self, for I didn't get to dress myself the way I preferred. So, my shirt wasn't tucked in, and it barely covered my big belly. Hopefully, she didn't notice. If she did, Miss Warnick didn't look around or comment about it. She was focused on what laid ahead of her. I never liked walking through the compound at night, especially with the halls being so narrow for two people, much less for me. The 5-inch thick doors screeched worse than a monster's roar. Every part of the compound we lived in was self-contained, from the residential areas to the lunch and power units, but reliant upon the system and my expertise in maintaining it. I didn't have any specific title, so anyone could call me a multitasker, because that was all I did. Lights flickered over us, and they needed to be replaced, but it was hard to get the scraps ever since our leader ordered a cease to venturing out some months ago. We navigated our way down the narrow halls until we came onto the part where the pipes ran along the wall toward the fire room. There was a hissing sound that was louder than the occasional hisses through degraded metal. On a mental note, replace those. Warnick raised her flashlight over the collection of pipes. My eyes flicked about the pipe system and saw nothing strange.
Can you see it, Renfrow?
Miss Warnick asked. I groaned in discontent because I was already tired. You said it alarmed back at the panel, right? She nodded her head and raised her eyebrows at the pipes. My lantern light dropped until I caught sight of it. There was a pipe near the ground that was ajar at the top, and it spewed steam in a light spray of water that I didn't want to touch unless I wanted bones for fingers. Found it, I said as I put on my heat-resistant gloves. As I pulled out my large, round saw to get to my screwdriver to open the control box and shut off this side of the pipeline, I noticed something. A mark against the floor was next to the pipe. I wasn't the only one, for Miss Warnick's flashlight moved closer as she leaned in and glared at that mark. She uttered to herself,
Is that?
"This pipe wasn't an accident," I said, even though the thought should have been left in my mind. I couldn't deny the way this pipe was knocked ajar. Something moved it. Her flashlight moved, and at the edge of the light, a shadow retracted. My lips parted, but I uttered no words. Miss Warnick turned with a whip of her head. Her eyes pierced the ground, but crackling thuds sent a chill up our spines. We were the only two people out here. We weren't moving, and as far as the rules, everybody should be asleep in their quarters. Where was that sound coming from? Miss Warnick's free hand grabbed the pistol on her hip. My eyes moved around as I lifted my lantern. The light moved across the wall, and I saw the inner pipes that sat within the wall. The long, decrepit arm of a mutant. The wires that curved along those pipes. The fasteners that tacked those wires to the... Hold on. My breath hitched as my shivering fingers fiddled with the cold metal handle of my lantern. I moved the lantern light back and I saw no arm. Okay, I definitely needed some sleep, because I was imagining things. Miss Warnick grabbed my collar as the same arm flew at the back of my head. The loud bangs of that pistol emptied into that yellow-eyed mutant, a tiger-toothed monstrosity that was once human but was now driving forward for our heads in its dirty rags. It dropped down and brushed at us. Warnick pushed me behind her. My lantern dropped and cracked into the ground as I wobbled back in surprise. The mutant growled, and as it spun its arms in a powerful swing, knocking the gun and flashlight from Warnick's hands.
Crap!
She cried out as she got pushed back and dropped on my legs. Ah, god damn it! I bellowed. The mutant stepped in the slow reveal of my lantern light. We needed to get out of here now. But what could we do when we didn't even have any weapons to fight with? One idea came to mind, but it was a hot one. I grabbed the saw and rolled my elbow into the pipe. That sent a full blast of steam into the saw and deflected it into the mutant's face. It screamed out aloud as its face melted off. That gave Warnick enough time to find her gun and fire it in the mutant's face. The mutant fell on the ground as he cried out in a fit of pain and slumped into a dead heap. Warnick and I were stone statues, watching in shock as the mutant winced and choked out its last breath. Our clothes moistened to the blood splatter of the now dead mutant. My morning started delightfully, but it ended pretty badly though. What we didn't expect was why the pressure break happened. It was them, those mutants, the ones that took Earth and left us hiding within this compound like a bunch of rats under a sewer. I didn't feel it then, but as the adrenaline left my body, boy, did I feel it after that ugly event. The scorching pain of hot water left my arm throbbing. Everybody woke up after that. By the time I reached the infirmary crying out in pain, the leader, Michael May, came down to check on me.
Renfrow, what the hell happened?
He asked. His eyes lasered into my bruised arm as he tilted his head. I explained what happened and even asked where Warnick was. He wasn't sure about Warnick, but considering the direness of the situation, she was probably dealing with the chaos on the compound. My ears picked up on the chorus of noise, yells, and screeching sounds of shoes against the floors from the mass movement of people. Michael exhaled short breaths in front of me and asked,
This has never happened before. How the hell did they get this far? Did you see any entranceways? Anything at all?
I groaned and tapped my bandaged arm. No, sir. Just a broken pipe.
That's it?
He asked incredulously. I shuddered from the bluntness of the question, but I was still shell-shocked from being attacked, so it took a while for my brain to catch up the rolling conspiracies that probably formed in the mind of everybody here, including Michael. A mutant entered our compound. That had never happened in years, and that was never supposed to happen. I saw it in Michael's eyes, the same terror that was traveling through the compound and raising the voices of everyone within to frightening levels. We all knew that if a mutant entered the compound, we were going to die like the rest of the human race that got crushed under the monstrous hunger and rage. Even the nurse rushed out of the room and was heard down the hall, inquiring from the other nurses any news on what was happening. What could I say to him? That was all I saw. I shook my head. I don't know, sir.
Renfrow, don't break on me right now. Get off your fat ass. That pipe needs to be fixed. That's the first thing. We don't want to lose power to the machines when everything else is going to hell.
A part of me wanted to complain about my burnt arm, but obviously, Michael could see that it wasn't life-threatening, and it wasn't a situation where I could avoid the urgency of the matter. I clenched my jaw and shook my head. Yeah, I'm coming, sir. Everything was a blur after that. When I came out of the infirmary, everybody was running around. There was a lot of shouting. I was able to return to the site of the attack, and the body of the mutant was gone with a cloud of water vapor filling the space. Empty, but the bloody hole was left to me as I crouched before the pipe system and proceeded to lock down this part of the pipe network. This was my home, and the only place I had, because outside of it, the entire Earth, as far as we knew, was overtaken by mutants. They were once human beings like us, but a disease ravaged the Earth. It spread like wildfire, turning our loved ones into unrecognizable creatures that only wanted our demise. We were the only ones immune to the disease. The spread of the disease was so quick, it was only classified as a global epidemic after the mutants became a problem. Two loud blasts froze me. I looked around and confirmed I was alone. A series of gunfire rang out, and it sent a destabilizing chill through me. What was going on? My breath became short as my eyes flicked around, anxious of what my cracked lantern could not reveal. Was that the mutants overrunning us as I stand here? Back then, mutants pulled the resources of police and armies while the disease took a hold of the world. People died in an immense wave of devastation as countries fell apart, from the health services trying to support the rising deaths of people on both fronts to the undermanned government losing its wit in the madness. The mutants became such a threat that they were bombed, but it barely sufficed. They would not be defeated. It was like they were cockroaches. I worked my way to the auditorium floor. If there was any news, it was going to be there where Mr. May would announce anything to the residents. It was utter chaos. So many people were running around. Children were crying as their mothers tried to calm them. Fathers were lifting boxes and luggage with the urgency of ER doctors. I saw Michael talking to Miss Warnick and some other guards under a large floodlight hanging off the bar house. Miss Warnick turned to me as I walked up to them and pulled my bag tighter to my back. I said, "Mr. May, I finished up, but I'm wondering if
there is a tomorrow?"
Michael May finished. He glanced at the guards who got anxious at being put under the spotlight of his gaze.
It's too late for that.
My heart skipped a beat as my eyes widened and I noticed the blood smears on the shirts of the guards. Michael then said,
"The mutants broke through the Section B wall. We were able to shut down that section, but as you know, that's next to Section C. They take that over, we have no food provisions."
Section C was where we had our farming efforts. Without that, all these people would starve to death. Michael continued,
"We need to leave."
My heart dropped down a cliff and left me a mumbling fool in shock. I blinked and raised my hands in a desperate waver. Hold on. You do realize the outside is worse. In here, we're protected. Outside, they number in the millions. We can't survive out there." Michael sighed.
Idiots. We can't survive in here. They already took over much of the compound. It's not like it's a few of them. It's hundreds breaking in front from the outside. It's the same freaking mutants who have been swarming our walls. For the past decade, they've been waiting for this opportunity, and now they've gotten it.
I couldn't utter a word as I stood there in avid shock. The news alone brought up stark memories of me running from them as a teen. The creeping horror of their shadows chasing me in the thick of the night. I remembered very little from my last day of normalcy on Earth. Now, all I had was my blood-soaked clothes, a haggled breath shaking my body to the core, and a mind shackled to a body that was useless to me. This was my home for so long. I was so glad I found it, even though Mr. May and the rest of us weren't even sure what was out there. None of our radios picked up anything. We didn't know if any human beings existed beyond us.
So Renfrow, I'm going to need your help with what we're about to plan. We're going to leave, but it's going to take us a while to pack everything and get everybody organized into the vehicles. What I need you to do is to help the guards at the wall, because that wall got damaged during their first assault. You know this place better than us, and I know they ain't going to stop. You have to keep those things from getting any further than Section C as long as you can.
I shook my head and asked, "I'm not sure about this leaving thing. What if we go outside and there's nothing out there? What are we going to do? Build another compound?" The guards glanced at me for expressing my concern. I hated being the center of attention. It always made me squirm and look down at my oversized legs. Michael May's eyes flicked around, envious of the fear within the people he shepherded. I fidgeted when he glared through me.
We'll figure it out when we get there, but we can't stay here. We don't have any time for blame. We can only move, and I've made my decision. And if push comes to shove, and we have to build a new home, you need to be with us. So, do what you gotta do, and do it quickly. Do I make myself clear, Renfrow?
I nodded reluctantly and replied, "Yes, sir." Mr. May turned to Warnick and said,
Escort him and make sure he makes it back. We'll be moving the vehicles to Section E. The rest of you, you know your duties. Now get to work.
Michael May stomped away, and so did some of the guards. I groaned inwardly to be left with such an important task. Worse to know that my failure was the death of everybody. My shoulder got slapped by a guard. I think his name was Brian. Brian said,
Damn, Renfrow. You good? What are you shaking for?
I hesitated, and that led to a round of laughter from the other guards. Warnick rolled her eyes and shook her head.
Do you think this is the time to be making jokes?
Brian scoffed and replied,
Chill. Everybody's on edge. Maybe you should lighten up. It was your guard duty that this screw-up happened on. You don't see us saying nothing.
I held my palms to try and calm them down, but my tongue got tied. Warnick smiled.
Section B is your friend's section to guard. That's on his sleepy head.
Brian replied,
Whatever. Big boy better do his job, since you slow as hell for a fat boy. They're gonna get you first.
He laughed and smacked my stomach as he walked around me. After Brian and the other guards left, Miss Warnick said,
Ignore them. They're just jerks.
I already knew that, but Brian's words sent chills down my spine. Brian was right. If I went outside, I was a huge target and not a fast one because of my weight problems. I really didn't like this, but we had to leave. Section C was the last bastion. I wasn't sure how much food they were going to take, and though our food stores were relatively plentiful, I could calculate it wasn't going to be more than several months of use, or more than a year, if Mr. May was strict enough. Some of the grain hadn't matured, but some could be saved. I had to see the situation first. So we went down to Section A, and the halls were as empty as a fool's mind. But the clamorous sounds of a chaotic crowd emanated from the distance. Explosions boomed as well, so our people were still fighting. By the time we climbed onto the adjacent building next to the wall that separated Section C from the outside square to Section A, there were many dead bodies of mutants rested alongside human ones. I grimaced and tried keeping my head up to avoid looking at the bodies. Miss Warnick ducked and took up a large white gun with a narrow cannon-like barrel of a falling guard. She pulled back a lever and a low screech emanated as it powered on. The BM gun. It fired pellets that burst into an expanding glue. They would see the results of it, for a bubbly goo formed up and grew into the shattered bricks of the wall some 50 yards away. It was used to block the entrance of the mutants, but how long would that last? The closer we got, the louder the mutants and the raging desires to crash through the walls. A nauseating odor made me crinkle my nose and shook me off my rocker. My eyes caught sight of the leaking ethanol liquid from a bullet-ridden large tank next to an empty storage room. With Section A enclosed, the smell traveled from a good distance. Section C was enclosed, but had a retractable roof powered by steam actuators. Michael May didn't like to have the roof open at night, so once the crops got their sun, it was closed down. We made our way into the wall's top layer, which allowed us to walk its narrow path. I looked down and I saw all of them. It must have numbered in the hundreds. I wasn't even sure, but this was what I could only see. I knew that beyond the horizon was more of them. That wasn't the thing that scared me though. I never saw so many eyes unwavering in their glares at me, as if I had stolen their life savings and left them destitute. In a way, they were, because they were hungry for our meat. The wall was covered in scratch marks from their attempted climbs over it. It was only a matter of time before it broke with all those cracks I saw. Miss Warnick said,
Son of a... It's a whole horde of them!
There was no way I could save Section C. That was a loss. So the huge vegetation that settled around these crazed mutants like a sore thumb and gave us our ground provisions was taken. On the edge of the belligerent crowd were ravenous mutants fiddling with the gates to the pigs' houses. There was another set of mutants bashing into a large metal gate to our section in crazed runs that shook it, sending an unsettling rattle into the air. Above that gate were men firing into the fray hoping to ward them off. But as one mutant was killed, another one from the crowd would just join the bashing line. Though they could not climb these walls due to their smoothness and height, our inner walls were not as thick and sturdy as the outside defenses. So with each rattle of the gate and wall, I feared my heart thumped its last beat. Miss Warnick stared at me, hoping I had an idea. But what could we do, really? Blocking the door was probably not going to last, and there were too many of them to take out. There were not enough bullets for that, or maybe we didn't need any bullets. My eyes caught sight of the pipes traveling across the top of the wall. The steam was under a lot of pressure when it passed through, so it's hotter than a furnace. That last mutant and I felt the burn the last time. I said, I have an idea, but it's risky, because I won't be able to control it. Miss Warnick shrugged her shoulders at me.
What is it?
Steam. We can increase the pressure and create a screen over the wall from the spraying vapor. It can only last a while though, and we can abandon the wall.
Okay, I see your point.
Miss Warnick replied. It will weaken the foundation. Besides, this wall can hold anyway. We don't have the manpower when we burn the crops to the ground. I replied back.
Burn the place down?
That's when Warnick gave me that crazy look I was fearing. I scratched my forehead and said, No, just this area. I was thinking it didn't make any sense if we tried to defend the wall. I say we turn this into a trap. Even if we lose the wall, they're going to struggle to get through because of the wildfire. Especially if you lock down the corridor to Section A. When we go back, they're going to get killed by carbon monoxide. They used to be us, so I'm willing to place a bet it affects them just like it affected us. Miss Warnick's facial expression softened as the idea began to crystallize in her mind. I added, or it might blow up. Either way, it helps, I suppose.
Okay, your call. Let's do it.
Miss Warnick said. I pointed at the men behind her and said, Tell them to get off the wall and you can sort them out. Burn the forest. Fire holes in the pipe and let the steam press out. I'll deal with the technical stuff.
Got it.
Miss Warnick replied before running off.
Luke, get me the napalm.
I ran to the closest control box and set the controls to increase the pressure as my lungs collapsed from all that moving around. At this rate, my lungs would lose out long before these mutants. By the time I came back around, I was sweating up a storm. Low whistling screeches drew my attention to the burst of missiles flying into the crowd of mutants behind the wall. Blasts of red glowed behind the wall as the cries became deafening. The guards were doing a good job setting the crops ablaze. I jogged my tired self to the wall and my eardrums were crushed by the all-consuming sound of their pain. At the top of the landing, I saw a rising cloud of steam pushing into the hordes of mutants into the growing flames, crawling toward their backs in a caustic desire to feed on their flesh.
Renfrow!
I huffed out a choke reply to Miss Warnick's shout. She stepped through an aura of steam with authority and grabbed my shoulder.
Let's go, Renfrow!
The guards ran into the square, while I hobbled into it, terrified of the frequent bashing of the gate and louder cries.
It's done?
She asked. I nodded my head and gestured at the wall. They're louder.
They're not enjoying their bath.
I snickered and quickly suffocated that. Damn, I was tired. But I hid it and said, Yeah, that should make them leave the walls for a bit. As soon as I said that, the wall caved in as the roars of the mutants raced over our beating hearts and consumed the air without mercy. Oh shit! They're coming!
You guys retreat to the square. I'll need to block this up again.
Miss Warnick said as she lifted the BM gun. There was no way she was going to be able to block a hole that big. No, you'll get overrun. The wall can fall. We'll plug up the connecting corridor. She looked at me with raised eyebrows, but after a brief second of indecision, she nodded her head resolutely and followed us. But after several seconds, they were running ahead of me, while I was struggling behind them in choked huffs.
Come on, Renfrow!
Miss Warnick shouted. My feet felt so heavy as I tried to keep up with Miss Warnick and others. The corridor leading out of this square was in sight. We only got 20 feet before the deafening shatter of the walls spewed forth and peeled down sections of it into the square. The mutants rushed into the square, crying for our deaths. Damn it! My mind went wild as I tumbled forward. I bounced against the cold concrete and rolled into a fire of bruised elbows and palms. Their cries got louder as they crept ever closer to the center. I couldn't move as fear ripped through what courage remained in my heart and left my limbs rigid as stone. It's over. There was no way I was going to survive this.
Renfrow!
Warnick called. I glanced up and my faded sight piqued Miss Warnick as she rushed to my aid. No, she couldn't be serious. Was she crazy? They would kill her. I looked back at the shadows blurring into violent shapes that obviously desired to break me into pieces. One mutant growled as it reached out its claws. A blast of goo hits it in the face and sent it flying back. Explosions burst into the disorganized voices of mutants and unsettled my body into a white vein that ran cold. Mutants dropped left and right as the guards fired into their vanguard. I coughed when I rolled onto my knees.
Carl Renfrow, don't you dare give up on me now!
I shuddered in shame as she slid to a stop next to me, cocking back the BM gun ready for the next unload. She grabbed my collar and tried pulling me up. I was already resigned to giving up, but if she felt my life was worth it, I couldn't make myself look like some discarded leaf. Everything hurt, including my arm, but I was able to jam my elbows into the ground and lifted myself up. Pushing into her stomach, she doubled back as she fired the gun with one hand and twirled me up with the other. My foot carried me forward, but it was like my legs were weighed down by the dead spirits that begged for me to join them. I reached into the grasp of one guard as we reached into the dark confines of the corridor.
Back up!
Miss Warnick shouted as she backed into us. She unloaded a new barrage of goo into an incoming wave of mutants. It formed and grew, tripping and grabbing the ankles of mutants around it. I called out breathlessly, "Seal the entrance!" She spun around and blasted into the narrow entrance 2 times. And that was enough, for the goo expanded into the entrance. We were sealed in, and darkness overcame us. Only our breaths were heard in this enclosed space. Their cries were nothing more than distant buzzes as the walls and housing outside of the goo fell apart from their incessant rampage.
That turned out well.
Miss Warnick said. My hand grasped my face, and moisture transferred off it in a slimy discharge worthy of disdain. I said, "Sorry." Light burst forth from a flashlight. It flashed in my face. My hands raced to shield the light until it went down.
Hey, we're alive. That's all that matters.
Miss Warnick said. Sometimes I forget that was all we needed. After Warnick shot goo into the corridor to reinforce the blockage, we navigated our way through the darkness back to the evacuation efforts. The blockage surprisingly held its ground, and before we knew it, we were living the only home we knew. It was still all strange to me. My fear was slightly gone now. All that was left was a sense of longing. When many of us looked back at the compound, all we saw was a building fire that overcame half of it, losing an immense column of black smoke. Many of the residents coughed and cursed my name on their lips. I didn't care much anymore. Death was our best friend now. Who knew where we would end up, or if tomorrow we would get killed by a mob of them?
They're not going to survive that.
Miss Warnick said as she stared into the flames. I huffed out breathlessly. Sad to see it go, but we've beaten them this time, even in retreat. I could take that to the grave, I think. The smoke obscured the roads leading out of it, so we were safe from those mutants. It was a question of the other mutants we would meet, but that was for tomorrow. Today, we mourned our home and walked the trek to look for another. Hey Creepypasta fans, it's Kian. Thank you for listening tonight. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Also, if you'd like to officially support the Dark Cosmos, you can do so by clicking on the Join button. Membership starts at only $5. Until next time everyone, and remember, stay cosmic.